Handsome cowboy meeting widow woman in dusty western town. Nervous first meeting. Afternoon light, 1880s Montana. Photorealistic, cinematic.
Subscribe to Wild West Soul Stories. Hit the bell, like, comment, and share. Thanks for watching.
The stagecoach rattled along the dusty trail as Eleanor pressed her forehead against the window, watching the endless expanse of golden prairie roll past. Her black morning dress felt heavy in the summer heat, but not as heavy as the letter clutched in her trembling hands. She had read it so many times the paper had grown soft at the creases. The words still burned like fresh wounds. Your presence is no longer welcome. We have made arrangements. A man named Samuel Crawford has agreed to take you as his wife. The fare has been paid. Do not return. Her brother-in-law had written those words just 3 weeks after her husband Thomas had passed from fever. 3 weeks. That was all the time her late husband's family had given her before they cast her out like yesterday's newspaper. Eleanor was 28 years old. She had no children, no money of her own, and now no family. Everything she owned fit in the single carpet bag at her feet. The stagecoach driver called out the approaching town. Copper Springs, Montana territory. Her new home, her new prison perhaps. Eleanor straightened her spine and lifted her chin. She had survived the death of her parents at 16. She had survived a marriage to a man who never quite loved her. She would survive this too. The town of Copper Springs was smaller than she had imagined. A single main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a church with a white steeple, and beyond that, rolling hills dotted with cattle. The stagecoach came to a stop in front of what appeared to be a small hotel. Eleanor gathered her bag and stepped down onto the dusty street. The afternoon sun blazed overhead as she looked around, searching for the man who had apparently purchased her like livestock. She expected someone old, someone desperate, someone who had paid her brother-in-law for the convenience of a ready-made wife. What she did not expect was the tall figure standing near the general store, hat in his hands, looking almost as nervous as she felt. He was perhaps 35, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His clothes were simple but clean, his boots worn but well cared for. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. Even from a distance, she could see they held a deep sadness, a loneliness that seemed to mirror her own. He approached slowly, like a man approaching a wild horse he did not wish to startle. "Mrs. Bennet?" His voice was low and gentle. "Yes." She clutched her carpetbag tighter. "You must be Mr. Crawford. Samuel." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I want you to know right away that I did not mean for this to happen the way it did." Eleanor blinked. "I beg your pardon. Your brother-in-law." Samuel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "He wrote to me months ago through a matrimonial advertisement I had placed. We exchanged letters. He said you were a willing participant, that you wanted to start fresh out west." He paused, studying her face. "But the way you looked at me just now tells me that was not entirely true." Eleanor felt her cheeks flush. "I only learned of this arrangement 3 weeks ago, the day after my husband was buried." Something flickered in Samuel's eyes. Pain, perhaps. Understanding. "Then I owe you an apology, ma'am. I would never have agreed to this if I had known you were being forced." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind picked up, sending dust swirling around their feet. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked quietly. Samuel placed his hat back on his head. "Now I take you to my ranch. You will have your own room, your own space. There is no obligation between us. If you decide you want to leave, I will pay for your passage anywhere you wish to go." Eleanor stared at him. "You would do that? For a complete stranger? My mother raised me to be a decent man, Mrs. Bennet." The ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I may live in the wilderness, but I have not become a savage." Despite everything, Eleanor felt the corners of her own mouth twitch. "Then I suppose you should call me Eleanor." The ranch was modest but well-maintained. A sturdy log cabin sat at the center, surrounded by a small barn, a chicken coop, and acres of grazing land where cattle moved like slow-motion waves across the grass. Samuel helped her down from the wagon and carried her bag inside. The cabin was simple but clean, with a main room that served as both kitchen and sitting area, and 2 doors that led to separate bedrooms. "This one is yours." Samuel opened the door to a small but pleasant room with a bed covered in a faded quilt, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the mountains. "It was my mother's room before she passed." Eleanor touched the quilt gently. "How long ago?" "She was all the family I had left." There was that loneliness again, worn like a second skin. Eleanor understood it better than she could express. Over the following days, they fell into a quiet routine. Samuel rose before dawn to tend the cattle, and Eleanor took over the household tasks. She cooked, cleaned, and mended. She planted a small garden behind the cabin and began gathering eggs from the chickens each morning. They ate their meals together, making small talk that gradually grew into real conversation. Eleanor learned that Samuel had come west with his parents 15 years ago, full of dreams of building something from nothing. His father had died in a blizzard the second winter, and his mother had passed from a broken heart as much as from illness. "I placed that advertisement because I was tired of being alone," Samuel admitted one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I thought maybe if I had a wife, the silence would not be so loud." Eleanor understood exactly what he meant. "My marriage was not a happy one," she found herself saying. "Thomas was not cruel, but he was absent. Even when he was in the same room, I always felt alone." Samuel turned to look at her. "That sounds like a different kind of loneliness." Yes, it was. As the weeks passed, something began to shift between them. It started small. Samuel would bring her wildflowers from the fields, leaving them in a jar on the kitchen table without a word. Eleanor began making his favorite foods, learning through trial and error what made him smile. They started taking evening walks together, talking about everything and nothing. Samuel showed her the creek where he had learned to fish as a boy. Eleanor told him about her childhood in Boston, about the parents she had lost, about the dreams she had once held close to her heart. "What were those dreams?" Samuel asked one night as they walked back to the cabin under a sky full of stars. Eleanor considered the question. "I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to travel. I wanted," she laughed softly, "I wanted to feel like I belonged somewhere." In the moonlight, his eyes were impossibly gentle. "Do you feel like you belong here, Eleanor?" Eleanor thought about the cabin that had started to feel like home. She thought about the satisfaction of hard work, of watching things grow under her care. She thought about Samuel's quiet strength, his kindness, the way he made her feel seen for that first time in her life. "I think," she said slowly, "I am beginning to." Samuel smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise. But happiness, Eleanor had learned, was a fragile thing. One morning, a letter arrived. It was from her brother-in-law, demanding that she return to Boston immediately. Thomas's estate had been settled, and there was a small inheritance. Her brother-in-law wanted her to sign it over to him. "You could go back," Samuel said quietly when she showed him the letter. His face was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "You could have your own money, your own life." Eleanor looked at the letter, then at Samuel, then at the mountains that had become her horizon. "If I went back," she said, "I would have money, but I would not have this." She gestured at the cabin, the land, the life they had built together. "I would not have you. Eleanor, I know this began as an arrangement," she continued. "I know neither of us chose this in the traditional way, but somewhere along the way, Samuel Crawford, I stopped seeing you as an obligation and started seeing you as—" She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. "As what?" Samuel stepped closer. His voice was barely above a whisper. Eleanor met his eyes, "As the greatest blessing I have ever known." For a long moment, Samuel simply stared at her. Then, slowly he reached out and took her hand in his. His palm was rough and warm, worn by years of honest labor. "When I placed that advertisement," he said. I was looking for a companion, someone to share the work and the silence. I never expected. He paused, struggling with words that seemed too big for his simple vocabulary. I never expected to find someone who makes the silence feel like music. Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. Samuel, I love you, Eleanor. I think I have loved you since the moment you stepped off that stagecoach and looked at me like you expected the worst but were prepared to face it anyway. A tear slipped down her cheek. I love you too. I think I have loved you since you offered to let me go. Samuel raised his other hand to gently wipe away her tear. Then stay, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because this is where you choose to be. I choose this, Eleanor whispered. I choose you. They were married properly the following Sunday, in the little white church in Copper Springs. The whole town turned out to witness the ceremony, though Eleanor knew only a handful of names. It did not matter. What mattered was the man standing beside her, holding her hand like she was the most precious thing in the world. She wrote back to her brother-in-law that same week. She informed him that she would not be returning, that he could keep the inheritance, and that she wished him well in whatever miserable life he had chosen for himself. She signed it Eleanor Crawford, and the new name felt like a promise. The seasons changed. Summer faded into autumn, and autumn surrendered to winter. Eleanor learned to preserve vegetables and bake bread that did not crumble to dust. Samuel taught her to ride, and she taught him to read poetry. They had their difficulties. The winter was brutal, and twice they lost cattle to the cold. There were days when money was scarce, and worry was plentiful. But there were also nights by the fire sharing stories and dreams. There were mornings watching the sunrise over the mountains, coffee cups warm in their hands. There were moments of ordinary magic that Eleanor would carry in her heart forever. Spring arrived with wildflowers and new beginnings. Eleanor began to feel unwell in the mornings, and it was the doctor in town who confirmed what she had secretly begun to hope. She told Samuel that, at evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the stars emerge one by one. A baby? His voice cracked on the word. A baby, she confirmed, unable to stop smiling. Samuel pulled her into his arms, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. When he finally pulled back, there were tears streaming down his weathered face. I thought I was destined to be alone, he managed. I thought I would live and die in this cabin without anyone to remember me. And now, he shook his head in wonder. Now I have everything I never knew I was missing. Eleanor cupped his face in her hands. Your mother would be so proud of you, Samuel. Your parents both would be. I hope so. He pressed his forehead to hers. I hope they can see what you have given me. I hope they know how grateful I am. I am the grateful one, Eleanor whispered. My family banished me here, thinking they were punishing me. They thought they were sending me to a life of hardship and regret. They never imagined they were sending me home. The baby came in the fall, a perfect little girl, with her father's dark hair and her mother's determined chin. They named her Hope, because that was what she represented. Eleanor wrote one final letter to Boston that winter. It was not addressed to her brother-in-law, but to any member of the household staff who might remember her kindly. She simply wanted someone there to know that she was well, that she was happy, that the worst thing they had done to her had become the best thing that ever happened. Years passed. The ranch prospered, and more children followed. A son named Thomas, after her late husband, because Eleanor had learned that forgiveness was lighter to carry than resentment. Another daughter named Martha, after Samuel's mother. The cabin expanded with the family, rooms added one by one until it became a proper house. The town of Copper Spur grew too, and Eleanor eventually fulfilled her dream of teaching at the new schoolhouse that opened on the edge of town. Samuel remained the same quiet, steady man she had fallen in love with on that first day. His hair turned gray at the temples, and the lines around his eyes deepened, but his gaze still held that gentle warmth that made her feel like the most beloved woman in the world. On their 20th anniversary, they returned to the spot where they had taken their first walk together. the creek where Samuel had learned to fish as a boy. The children were grown or nearly so, and the house was quieter now, but the silence was no longer lonely. "Do you ever think about what might have happened?" Samuel asked, watching the water sparkle in the afternoon light. "If you had not come here, if you had found another way." Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder. "I used to. In the beginning, I used to lie awake wondering how my life had taken such an unexpected turn. But now," she smiled, "now I cannot imagine any other path." "I thank God every day for you," Samuel said. "Every single day. And I thank God for the family that banished me." Eleanor laughed softly at the irony. "Without their cruelty, I never would have found this kindness. Without their rejection, I never would have found this acceptance. Without their attempt to punish me, I never would have found this blessing." Samuel pulled her closer. "Some people go their whole lives without finding what we have." "I know." Eleanor closed her eyes, letting the peace of the moment wash over her. "That is why I will never take it for granted. Not for a single day." The sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in the same shades of orange and pink that had welcomed Eleanor to Copper Springs all those years ago. She had arrived with a single carpetbag and a heart full of uncertainty. She had found a home, a family, a love that filled every corner of her life with light. She had been banished to a cowboy, and she had become his greatest blessing, just as he had become hers. The end.